What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Ole. Today's video, we're going to be looking at all these different components we got here. We're going to be putting everything together onto this 5-inch frame, and we're going to have ourselves a nice working 5-inch FPV drone, hopefully at the end of this video. Now, this is my second build. The first build I made was on a Nova frame. It was a cheaper build. I went with cheaper components. I was very new to the hobby, so I knew I was going to be doing a lot of crashing because, of course, that's what FPV pilots do. Probably one of our favorite things to do is crash. And so I decided, I'm going to make myself a beater drone. I'm going to learn a lot from it, and that was exactly the case. I'm glad I did that. The unfortunate thing is, if you are following my previous videos, then you know that I did lose that drone. I upgraded to TBS Tracer system, and I went out to fly, and the first time I went out to fly, I was able to fly pretty far. It gave me a lot of confidence to do so, and so I guess I went too far, got a few things in between me and the drone, and so the link actually was lost. The drone fell. Of course, I wasn't recording DVR. Why would I? That would have probably helped me find the drone. But the battery did get yanked out on the way down. So I went to look for it. I don't know if it's stuck up in the tree somewhere in those woods or it did make it down to the ground. But short story is it is gone. So we're moving on to the next drone. Anyways, let's go over these components, see what we got here, and then we'll get into the build. So for the flight controller, we got the iFlight SucceX-E F722 board. This is a nice little flight controller. The best thing about it is, for those of you that are new to soldering, maybe this would be a great little thing. It's got a whole bunch of connectors on the bottom, so you can just go ahead and plug in connectors instead of soldering everything on the top. So that's a big plus. For the 4-in-1 ESC, the only thing that I really don't like about it is this huge capacitor that they have already installed. And the thing is, when you try to mount this traditionally on a frame where the capacitor is in the back, you need quite a bit of clearance, as you can see, so the capacitor doesn't touch the frame. So what I'm going to end up doing to just get around that is I'm going to mount it sideways. That way the capacitor comes out to the side of the frame like so. Like this, and I won't have to make all that clearance on the bottom for it not to touch the frame. For the motors, we got the iFlight XING-E Pro 2207 1800 kV motors. I have not used these motors before, so I'm quite excited. These are some high quality motors, so we'll see the performance there. For the VTX, of course, I had to go with the TBS Tracer, the TBS Unify Pro32. This thing can output up to 2 watts, which is pretty crazy. But I usually fly alone, so that wouldn't be an issue, because when you're flying with a group, you don't really want to just blast 2 watts of VTX output. Might cause some issues. Yeah, but I usually fly alone. Sometimes I fly with my buddy, but he flies DJI, so that's totally okay. For the receiver, we got the Tracer receiver. We got the Tracer system here. So here's the receiver. I went ahead and soldered on these wires with the connector already, so we'll have a little less work when it comes to soldering everything. For the camera, I went with the RunCam Phoenix Joshua Bardwell edition. Of course, he said it's an amazing camera, so we'll see. I haven't used it, but I did hear good reviews about it online, so I trust him. Anyways, let's move on. This thing right here, this is the VIFLY Finder 2. This thing is what I needed on my previous drone in order to find this, honestly. Like, if I had this, I would not have lost that drone. So basically what it is, I put it already in this little TPU mount, and it's quite hard to get it out. So I guess it's good. It'll stay in there permanently. But what it is, it's a big buzzer with a onboard little battery, little LiPo. And what happens is it can detect whenever there's a power loss, and it will start beeping very, very loud for quite a while, I think a few hours, until the battery gets fully drained. But yeah, if I had this on my previous drone, there's no way I would not have found it. If you're in the near the area where your drone crashes and you got this thing, you will 100% hear it beeping and you will find your drone. So this is gonna help me in the future if I do lose my drone anyway. I don't know why I would lose it, but if it does happen, this is gonna be the saver right here. Alright, so let's go over the antennas here. So I found this little TPU print on Thingiverse, and it holds your two tracer antennas and it holds your VTX antenna, and then it just goes on two standoffs in the back. So I think this is pretty cool, a little print here. Now we have some other prints here. These are, I kind of made these myself. These are gonna be for the frame. We're gonna put these on the frame like so. And what it does is, for one, it will protect, let's focus on, it covers this here, so it'll protect the tip from, you know, banging into something, and it'll protect the motor a little bit as well. And the other thing is, it's definitely got a decent offset here from the frame, so when you land on flat ground, it will land on the TPU prints and not on the frame itself. So we got 4 of those. We got this little piece here, which is for the VTX. You just put the VTX under it and then put this on top, screw it down so it holds the VTX to the frame. This here is for the receiver. Put the receiver in here and screw that onto the frame. What else? And we got the GPS here. I kind of forget which GPS this is, so I'll throw a picture over here on the side for you guys. And this TPU print is just gonna go on top of the frame. You got the GoPro mount right here and the GPS holder. So I think that's it. I think that's all the components that we had to go over. So now let's start putting this thing together. Alright, so first thing I want to do is I want to get this 4-in-1 ESC on board. Oh, can't be losing that stuff. So as I said, I'm going to be mounting this sideways. Let me zoom in a little more. There we go. So yeah, I'm mounting it sideways. As you can see, the capacitor is going to come out the side here, so I won't need as much clearance on top. So that's that. I'm not going to throw on any gummies yet. And let's get these motors on the drone. These motors are going to be held by only 3 screws on this frame, so keep that in mind. Make sure you really tighten the motors down, because once you start flying, there will be a lot of vibrations and stuff, so you want it to be tight so it doesn't loosen up while you're flying and then you have one motor fly off. That would not be good. Just open all them up. If you guys have used these iFlight E Pro 2207 1800 kV motors, let me know in the comments below what you think of them. Did I buy some junk over here, or are these actually good motors? From the research I did do, which I didn't do that much, I just kind of wanted to get the components and build this thing already. But from the research that I did do, they seemed like good motors. I did hear some people that didn't really like them, but you know, not everyone's gonna like everything, right? All right, there we go. We got all 4 motors in. And so now we're gonna have to measure out how long we want these wires to be, and then we're gonna solder them onto this ESC. Oh, one more thing I should mention right now. If you are doing what I did here with the 4-in-1 ESC, where you're turning it pretty much 90 degrees clockwise, so your battery leads don't come out the back, but now they're on the left side. What you're gonna need to do at the end, when we finally build this and we get to the software component, what you're gonna need to do is you're gonna rotate all of your motors. All right, so let's measure out how long we want these wires to be. All right, get a nice zoom in there. So I'm gonna cut them like right at the end of the soldering point. Make sure, I'm just gonna do them one by one. So I'm gonna tape them down to the frame at the end, so I gotta make sure that I have enough for that. That's 1, that's 2, 3. Okay, let's see, try not to make them too short, because then you're really gonna screw yourself over. But yeah, I believe that's good. Let me go cut this one a little bit. There we go. Let's move on to the next one. After this, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to strip the wires just a little bit. There we go. Here, so I'll show you guys how much I'm actually taking off. As you can see right here, it's very little. Alright, we got our soldering iron, we got our solder, and some flux. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw on solder onto the ESCs here. Put a little flux on the end. So if you're not if you're new to soldering, what you're going to want to do here is, first of all, just put a little solder on the tip, get it nice and clean, and then what you're going to want to do is you're going to heat up the pad and then add solder, just like so. There we go. And you should be really using a fan with this, because you don't want to breathe in all these fumes. So as you can see, all we're going to do here is just put a little solder onto these 3 soldering points here, make a little bubble, and that's all. Alright, so let's do the other 3 sides. Be generous on the solder. The more solder you add, the easier it will be to connect the wires. 1 second, I'm getting a call. Hello?
Come to the backyard to eat now.
Okay, bye.
Okay?
Yep. Alright, moving on to the next one. And that's the last one. Alright, so that's that. We got all the solder onto the ESC controller. Alright, now we're going to tend the wires. So if there's any strands sticking out, just give the wires a little twist with your finger so everything is nice and tight, nothing is sticking out. And then what you're going to do is take your iron, just place it under the wire so it starts heating up the wire, and then add a little solder. That way we get the wire nice and tinned. And we're going to do that to all the wires for all the motors. Alright, so to make this easier, I'm going to take off these standoffs just so they're not in my way. There we go. Now we have a little more room over here for soldering, so that's good. Alright, So we got our wires pre-tinned. We got the solder on the, honestly, I think I'm not gonna use the tweezers because it's gonna be just easier for me this way. I think I did cut them a little too short maybe, but I will still be able to tape it down here. But as you can see, they are like just going up here. But it's fine. It's not too short to the point where it doesn't reach the board. That's the most important part. You don't want to cut it to the point where you extend the wire and you can't reach the board, because now you have to splice wire, and it's just gonna be a mess. So try to cut it long enough for you to reach the ESCs. And here's our last motor here. There's one, there's two, and for the last one. So that's it for the motors. We got all the motors installed. Next, what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a bit of solder to these plus and minus terminals. And for these, you're gonna want to add a lot. You're gonna want a decent sized bubble. Therefore, when you go ahead and attach those very thick wires, oh, first of all, let's put a little flux on here. Don't forget that. It's a very, very important step. All right, so let's get back to here. So yeah, as I said, you're gonna want to make these bubbles here quite big. So add a lot of solder to it because the XT60 that you're gonna connect later on, the wires on it are pretty thick. So you're gonna want them to really have a good connection onto the board here. And in order to achieve that, you're gonna want a nice big bubble of solder to really cover those wires. So here we go. As you can see, pretty big bubbles I got going here. So make sure you don't cheap out on the solder here. Alrighty, we're gonna actually do the XT60 way later because I haven't actually measured it and pre-cut the length I need, but I'm gonna have it sticking out the back here. Oh, and speaking of it, there is another TPU print I didn't go over earlier in the video that I made, which is this guy. You attach it to the back of the drone on the standoff, well, on the top, screws onto the top plate, and then it just holds your XT60 up there. Now let's install our VTX. So we got our Unify Pro. We're gonna place it over here, and then we have that 3D print that's gonna go right over top of it, like so, like that, and then it's gonna get screwed into the standoffs here. Not the standoffs, what am I saying? The 30 by 30 mount here. And just to speed this process up, I'm going to go ahead and use a power drill just to really screw these in quicker instead of doing it by hand. And when you put them into the TPU, when you start screwing them into the TPU, it's gonna kind of there's no threading in the TPU, but it's gonna catch on. All right, there we go. So this is how it's gonna look. As you can see, it's a pretty good TPU mount, in my opinion. You have the VTX just sitting flush on the frame, and then it's just being compressed from the top with this TPU. And I mean, this thing is not coming off either. Like, the screws really get in there and get a nice grip, so it's not going anywhere. All right, so that's our VTX. We should really look at what the wiring is like here, but I'm just gonna, instead of taking this off, I'm gonna go ahead and Google the points here, which ones, what wire is what. I'm sure this is gonna be our power, and then transmit, receive, and then for smart audio. So we'll look that up later on when we get to the point where we have to solder these onto the flight controller. So next we're gonna throw on this little TPU mount on top, which is for our receiver. There we go. And once again, this thing is not going anywhere. And then this receiver is just gonna go right into here. And eventually at the end, what I'm planning to do, just to have a little more, you know, it's not gonna go anywhere, because once you connect it to the flight controller and the antennas are gonna be mounted on there. So it's not like you're gonna have your receiver just fly out. But I did want to secure it a little more, so I might just throw like a zip tie over the whole thing at the end. I'm not sure yet, so we'll see how that goes. So next, let's go ahead and install the antennas here. We got our VTX antenna and our RX antennas on this TPU mount. Before we slide it all the way down, what we're going to want to do is push in that VTX antenna. Now push down the TPU mount all the way, and then we're going to clip on our two antennas here. Next, the camera, pretty simple. It's just, I already mounted it onto these golden brackets that came with the frame, and it just pops in here just like that, and then you can adjust your angle and all that. But before we go ahead and install that, what I want to do is I want to install this buzzer into these 20 by 20 mounts here, which is, once again, the awesome thing about this frame is you get 3 20 by 20 and 30 by 30 mounts in the front, the middle, and the back. All right, so let's go ahead and pop in this buzzer. Make sure that's nice and tight. You don't want to lose that. It's definitely not coming out of that TPU print, but make sure that's tight on the frame. Alrighty, so that's pretty solid on there. Now we're gonna put on the camera once again. Alright, there we go. And our last piece is the flight controllers. So let's go ahead and throw on our gummies onto the 4-in-1 ESC. I want a little bit of clearance between the flight controller and the ESC, because as you can see, the flight controller has some components here on the bottom that kind of tend to stick out a little more, like this little capacitor here. I think that's a capacitor, not sure. So we're gonna definitely need these gummies in between to give us that clearance. You don't want the two boards touching, because that's a risk of a short happening, and that's the last thing you want to happen to your drone. I've actually had a short happen before. I plugged in the LiPo and I saw smoke coming out. If you guys want to see the video, I'll link the video up here. And it was crazy. I thought that I burned the whole drone. Thank God I didn't. But the leads for the XT60, they were kind of rubbing on the frame, and it rubbed through the insulation, and so the positive and negative leads were touching the carbon fiber frame, which is conductive. And so when I plugged in the LiPo, boom, smoke right away. So if you guys are interested in the video, right here down in the description also, so go ahead and check that out. All right, so let's zoom in here. We got the standoffs, I mean the gummies on. So next, what I want to do, I gotta make sure that this wire is gonna reach the flight controller, and that's gonna go in right here. So let me plug that in first, like so, and then what we're gonna do is kind of run the wire in between the flight controller and ESCs. Let me give that one more twist. Twist the wires when you can, just to make them you know, not loose and hanging out everywhere. There we go. So that sits on there very nicely. It's got a little bit of cushion for vibrations, so your flight controller doesn't freak out, because the accelerometer on there is definitely going to be sensitive to any vibrations. Alrighty, so we got that. Alright, so at this point we're gonna have to figure out which wires we are using, which wires we are not gonna be using, which solder points we're gonna be using on the top of the flight controller, and which ones are we gonna be using down here to connect to the flight controller. Like for example, this receiver, we're not going to be soldering anything. We're just going to go ahead and connect it straight into the flight controller. So let's go ahead and figure out everything we're going to be using, and we'll continue shortly. Alright, so it took me a little bit to figure out what wires I am going to be using, what I'm not going to be using in this build. Also, it took the time to figure out what UARTs I'm going to be using for my receiver, my VTX, GPS, and also this RunCam here also takes a RX and TX pad, so you can kind of do the configuration straight from your radio. You don't have to plug in any board to it to set it up. But the problem I'm having, not really a problem, but I only have one spare UART on this flight controller. This flight controller comes with 4 UARTs. You have one that you're going to be using for your ESCs, one I'm going to be using for the receiver, one for the VTX, and then I have one that's spare, and the GPS is a way higher priority for me than the configuration that I can do with the TX and RX pads for the camera. So I'm not going to be using the camera TX and RX. I'm going to be taking that spare one and attaching that GPS to it. So yeah, let's start with the back. We have our receiver that's just a connector, so that's going to be pretty easy. Just plug that in. As you can see, I did put a little zip tie on here just to hold down the receiver so it's nice and tight and doesn't fall out, especially during build too. I don't want it flopping around. So let's start with the VTX here. So you have your RX and TX pads, wires, I mean, your white and green. The yellow is going to be your video wire, and then this orange and black is if you want to power the camera from your VTX, which I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to be grabbing power off of the flight controller for the camera. So I won't be using this black and orange wire here, and I definitely won't be using this connector, so that's going to get cut off. And then this black and red will be the main power for the VTX, and we'll also be cutting this connector off, won't be using that. Alright, so orange and black wire won't be used. So first of all, let's cut this connector off. And let's cut this connector off. Alright, then orange and black, that we are not using, so I'm going to cut that right here. And these two connectors here, I'm not going to be using that as well, so I went ahead and cut them off. And I actually was trying to record when I was recording while I was cutting that off, but my main camera up here died, so I didn't get that. VTX is going to be using RX1 and TX1, so that's UART1. The receiver is going to be using UART2, and the GPS over here is going to be using UART4. Buzzer Plus is pretty much 5 volts. So if you're ever in need of a 5-volt pad and you don't have one available, you can always use Buzz Plus as your 5-volt pad. So just quick tip. Up in the front here, we're going to be using, let's see. So VI is video in, which is going to be what your camera connects to. And then VO is going to be video out, which will be your VTX video wire. Alright, and then our voltage, this VTX is going to take 5 volts. Actually, is it 5 volts or do I need battery voltage? I'm not sure. Alright, so it looks like it takes anywhere from 6 volts to 36 volts, so I'm going to go ahead and power it off of battery voltage, which I'm running SucceX on this build. And then when you're tinning your wires, it's good practice to honestly put something over your flight controller, because all it takes is a little bit of solder to just flick off of your iron or your wire and land on like the main processing chip, and you're screwed. You're gonna need to get yourself a new
a new flight controller, and you don't want to do that because they are not cheap with all these chip shortages we're going through right now. Kind of ridiculous if you ask me.
So for the camera, we're only going to be connecting 3 wires to the flight controller, the 5 volts, ground, and video. These 2, I'm just going to wrap them around probably, I don't know. I definitely don't want to cut them off. Throw a little bit of heat shrink over this. If I do decide to put this camera on a different build and I do have a spare UART on it, then I can use that feature, which is great. It's an awesome feature. So I don't want to lose out on that like forever just because I'm stupid and I decided to cut these wires off. So just gonna fold it like that, throw some heat shrink over here. Let me just cut the ends off as well so it's not stripped on the end. Then I'm gonna throw heat shrink over top like this. Let's get a lighter and shrink this guy. I'm only gonna shrink the end here. I guess I'll shrink the whole thing, why not, right? I'm not gonna go too crazy with it. There we go. Alright, so that will just be, you just put it in like that. There we go. Alright, so now we got our 5 volts ground and video wires. And these are going to go over here. So video in from the camera and then 5 volts and ground, right? All in line right here. I'm new to this whole YouTube thing, so, well, fairly new. But I'm going to be trying to post more on the channel. So yeah, if you guys like what I'm doing here, and if you guys want to help out, just throw me a like and subscribe. At least consider subscribing. It'll really help out the channel, and you guys are gonna make me one happy camper. Alright, now let's do the do. A little flux. And let's put some solder on there. There we go. And lastly, we got the video in. Boom. Alright. So that's good for the camera. Alrighty. Now all we have left is the GPS, and of course we can't forget about the XT60. But this is going to be at the end because I need to measure out how long I'm going to need this wire. Alright, so for the GPS, right? Before I couldn't take this all out of the TPU, but this is the Beitian, I guess, I don't know how to pronounce it. Beitian BN-880 GPS. No real reason why I went with this one over any other, but so we're going to be using the UART 4, I believe. Let's see. GPS, yeah, UART 4. So RX and TX4, which are right over here. And then the GPS also gets soldered to that SDA and SCL, which are also over here. And then we're going to do the 5 volts and ground. So altogether we got 6 wires. And these connectors we will not be using. So let's go ahead and cut those off. So I've never used a GPS on a quad before. This is going to be my first build with a GPS. And as you probably know from me rambling before, how I lost my previous drone. And man, if I only had a GPS or even that buzzer finder thing, like, could have definitely found my drone. We got yellow wire is going to be, let's double check. I gotta plug this connector in here to see. All right, so if it's like that. So yellow is SDL. All right, there we go. Okay, so before we move on, I'm just gonna quickly throw my meter onto the battery pads here, and I'm gonna test for continuity just to make sure that there's no internal shorts anywhere. So if you hear a noise like this, that means we got a short, and that's bad. All right, so we're good. You hear the initial beep, that's fine, but as long as it doesn't stay beeping continuously, then you're all good. So we did pretty good here. No shorts, which is a win. So now we gotta do the XT60. So this guy is gonna get mounted right on the back, right here. So I'm gonna put the wires through this hole in the back. Oh, and then, so if that's gonna get mounted right here, and it looks like I can cut them right about here, yeah? Yeah. Alright, so let's strip some of this insulation off. And we have a nice big bubble of solder on the plus and minus pads, which that's the one spot where you want to just really put a lot on, because as you can see, these wires are, let's focus here, there we go. These wires are pretty thick. What gauge is this? 14 gauge. So you're gonna want a lot of solder. It'll make it way easier for it to actually connect. So let's move it to the side. Let's go ahead and put flux on here. And let's go ahead and add a whole bunch of solder to these wires. Alright. Nice and sizzling. There we go. Let's flip them over. Let's do the other side. You just want the solder to really flow through all the strands, and it just kind of makes this one solid wire. I'm going to cut this just a little bit to make it a little smaller. I don't want that much wire. Yeah, once you add a lot of solder to the wire, it's going to be harder to cut. Whoa, that thing just shot over there. Melt this thing down. There we go. Now let's place this right here. All right. Now these get really hot, especially because you're gonna have to hold them for a little longer than those little wires. So just be ready for that. If you want to use tweezers, you should. All right, and next one. There we go. All right. And make sure you get the red on plus, black on minus. I mean, probably don't have to mention that, but as you can see, pretty nice and solid connection. And I might as well show you up close view of the rest of the board here. Pretty messy, you can't see much I guess, but it's all there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull this wire, GPS connector, through the little hole here. Right? I'm gonna throw the top plate on. We also are gonna, oh wait, before we do that, I forgot. We took these standoffs off. So now would be the time to put them back on. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, I'm gonna do the XT60 wires inside the standoff here. So let's go ahead and push this through. And then we need to get these wires through here. Alright. That's looking pretty good. Let's throw on 2 2 back screws. There we go. That's nice and tight. There we go. Line that up. Alright, let's just hand tighten this a little bit. Alrighty. Boom. Let's throw on the GPS. Let's get this bad boy connected. Alright. And then I'm going to push him in here. Like so. Okay, so what else we got? We will put this antenna on. This is our video antenna. Try not to tighten your video antennas too much also, like you don't want to screw up the connector. Alright, and for one last continuity check, make sure everything's good. There we go. No noise, so we are good. We are golden, so we can power this guy up and not be afraid of any smoke. I'm actually not gonna power it up now because I have oh look, I found the screw we were missing. It was attached to the motor since you got magnets on it. Alright, but yeah, I'm actually not gonna power it up now because I actually don't even have a SucceX LiPo right now that is charged at all. All my LiPos are dead because I haven't had a working drone in a while, so I never bothered to charge them. Why are you going to charge the LiPos if you're not going to go flying, you know? So once I go ahead and charge a LiPo, I'll go ahead and plug it in, test it out. I'm sure everything is fine. It passed our continuity test. Then I'll go ahead and add the, I'll put on Beitaflight on here, of course. I'll do the whole setup over there. And we'll go for a flight. Once we get some nice weather and I get some time, I'll go out, fly around. I'll record it obviously, and I'll throw a video shortly after. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. I will appreciate it a lot, and consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace out.